That is fundamentally the issue. California's AG, again, Rob Bonta, shared the information. I am now going to go over some of this info with you guys. There's plenty more for you to jump into, but I want to make sure that you guys have an understanding of why it is that this is just another example of a corporation. We talked about JetBlue. We talked about Wendy's. We talked about Walmart. This is just another example, and you may even recognize some names in this story. So let's go over it here, shall we? Amazon, Levi's, and wait for it, Walmart all agreed on increased retail pricing for khaki pants. And the way it would operate essentially is that Amazon would send Levi's links to khaki pants prices lowered on Walmart.com. Amazon would says it hoped, in quotes, that these can get resolved over the next few days. Levi's reports say, I talked to Walmart and they have partnered with us to take Easy Khaki Classic Fit back up to $29.99 immediately. Levi's provides the links to show the increased Walmart price. Amazon acknowledged that Walmart raised its prices and confirmed it had matched that higher price. So this has nothing to do with Joe Biden and government spending. This has nothing to do with the tariffs that Trump levied on the cost of just about every good available for us to buy that we are now going to see funneled back into the hands of companies but not consumers to the tune of $166 billion. This is an entire separate entity. And if the people who have been nominated, elected to represent us, to be in office representing the people in their area, then they have to be willing to have this conversation. Amazon, Hanes, and Target worked to raise the price of apparel. Amazon sent Hanes links to Target.com and Walmart.com showing lower prices than were on Amazon. Hanes confirmed that it reached out to both Target and Walmart to have their prices increased. This is all available and on the public record. This should be story number one every hour. Every hour in mainstream media. These are all of the major corporations that pretend to be competing with one another, all colluding without any type of real mom and pop energy to be able to combat these, stop me when you've heard it before, artificially inflated prices. Amazon, AgroThrive, and Home Depot worked to raise their prices on plant fertilizer. How many of you are hearing stories about a 70% increase to the cost of fertilizer as a result of Donald Trump's tariffs? Yep, me too. And guess what? Those are accurate stories, but it doesn't change the fact that the price point prior to the tariffs was already unnecessarily high relative to what needed to be charged to turn a profit. Amazon complained to vendor AgroThrive about lower prices for AgroThrive products at Home Depot. AgroThrive responded, yes, just got out of a meeting with Home Depot manager and she has agreed to raise the prices this time. It doesn't matter what company I am talking about. Amazon is using their market power in order to generate the kind of outcomes that they want that maximize the profits of a handful of companies at the expense of the rest of us. This is all concrete information. I am reading you quotes from emails, and I'm not even done. Amazon, Global One, and Chewy agreed on increased retail prices for pet treats. Plan in an email between Amazon and its vendor, Global One. Amazon would raise Global One's Canine Naturals pet treat prices to get Chewy to follow. Global One would then reach out to Chewy to let them know that Amazon was increasing the prices and would ask that Chewy follow. Amazon told Global One that the price match override was in place and to let Chewy know to update pricing immediately. That same day, Global One confirmed that ones that went up on Amazon immediately went on Chewy. Overall, this looks like it's working. Amazon, Chewy, and Global One's price fixing agreement to increase their retail prices of Canine Naturals pet treat products on Amazon and Chewy. This is reported for all of you to read. This is the main culprit for why life seems so unaffordable. And here I was thinking it was Somali immigrants. Boy, is my face red. It turns out that it is what progressives have been saying since 2012. The coordination of a handful of companies that have completely monopolized a market, that do not fear lower prices from competition. And when their major competition does in fact have lower prices, all it takes is a quick email to make sure those prices shoot straight through the roof again, keeping all of us chasing our tails, wondering what has led to such a stretched standard of living. This is incredibly frustrating to me from a number of different perspectives. The obvious one being just the nefarious nature in which these companies are comfortable acting, knowing that if it weren't for, albeit, no fan of California, but if it weren't for the AG in California, we would not be getting this information funneled to us. We'd be hearing about Mexicans are getting all our money. And instead of having a real conversation, and moreover, the audacity of the Democratic Party to label people talking this way as conspiracy theorists, only to then turn around and decide that they now want to investigate it now that conservatives control everything. And it does raise the question, in a world where Kamala Harris won the presidency, would they still be investigating this, or would they be telling us that inflation is transitory? Would they be telling us that the cost of living isn't up, it's only in our heads that it is up? Is it only because there is a conservative in office? We know conservatives will not hold major corporations to account, especially when it is that they are in power. And as Jeremani highlights, I'm sure it's still because of the immigrants. She's saying that sarcastically. We all know billionaires have our best interests in their minds at all times. Which exactly, like, this should be public enemy number one. This should be at the top of everybody's electoral agenda. We are not going to tolerate being exploited anymore, and we will not take part in this system, because we have a Democratic Party who's willing to tell you that it's in your head, and a Republican Party who will use it as an opportunity to demonize any of the non-whites. And then the progressives sit there saying, we're just trying to make sure you can all afford some basic standard of living. And somehow that's the population of people that's demonized by both sides of the political aisle. But this is just yet another example. And it really, really does need to be mentioned again that Lina Khan called the exploitation of JetBlue and people needing tickets for funerals back in 2024. And for those of you newer to the program, and honestly, even the older listeners probably don't know this entire story, a person from the Kamala Harris campaign essentially was worked with me one-on-one. I never got the same opportunity from a GOP candidate. And they would say, Ben, we want to get people on your show. Who would you like to talk to? And I would say, I would like to talk to somebody about Kamala Harris's future of antitrust were she to win the presidency. And they would feed me someone that would have no idea about what I was talking about. They're like, okay, who do you want next? I'm like, well, I didn't necessarily get the information that I was looking for. I would like you to send me an antitrust person. That routine followed for about 4 or 5 different guests until I stopped interacting with the emails altogether, because it became abundantly clear to me that that woman had no intention of trying to crack down on corporate greed, taking advantage of the population. Will never figure out why she lost. Lina Khan was willing to call this stuff out in 2024. Whether Harris won, and as we can see under Trump right now, it was going to go unchecked. And if you want to win elections, if you actually believe that what MAGA and the GOP represent is a threat to democracy and a threat to the standard of living or the basic freedoms that you are used to experiencing, then it should piss you off to no end that Democrats are not seizing this moment in a meaningful way. Statewide, they are. Yes, the work has been done for you already. It took me 2 hours to put this segment together. It wasn't a particularly difficult ask. And if you genuinely believe democracy is at stake, like what the Democrats quite literally ran on, here is your shortcut to not playing identity politics, not talking about issues that impact 2% of the population, showing you that the biggest corporations on the planet, responsible for record shares of the share of our buying and corporate entities, of the market, their shares of the market are so high that we cannot compete with them, are coordinating against the basic aspects of capitalism that allowed this country to be built. You want to know why young people are so in favor of socialism and communism? Is because this is the version of capitalism that has existed for the last 15 to 25 years, and it is only growing more flagrant as time goes on. These people should be penalized to hell and back. Financial death penalty, as far as I'm concerned. Break them up and let mom and pops fill the gap. If Republicans and blue MAGA Dems actually believe in the working class, in small businesses, in the average American and the work ethic of America, it shouldn't be a particularly difficult ask for a bunch of people to open their own stores in their own area and start to compete with this in a meaningful way. Because in no uncertain terms, there are coordinations between Amazon, Target, Walmart, Home Depot, Chewy, Global One, all these different entities, all coordinating to raise your prices, knowing that you will either blame Democrats or Republicans, depending on what party you affiliate with. And I am here to tell you that this outcome is a fixed point. This was always going to happen, and to be perfectly frank, still is happening. And it's not because we provided government funds to bail people out after COVID. And it's not, well, it's partially because of the tariffs, but that wouldn't have anything to do with the record profits. As Larry points out on the YouTube chat, capitalism morphs into feudalism, i.e., kings and queens. You know what's funny, Larry, is there's a common phrase on social media apps these days highlighting that in the feudal era, people got 150 days off from work. So not only is it comparable to the feudal era, in America, we actually have to work more. It's not as backbreaking of labor, but we have less time off than what was going on in that era, despite the obvious parallels between that era and what we are dealing with today. Text lines. Ben says the Uniparty will keep on keeping on. It's why we stuck fighting over nothing birders. Exactly. This is distraction politics 101. And as I've mentioned, and I'll be writing an article for the WHBY website, but I want to float this for the listeners first. Email me or use the text line. I'm going to be the keynote speaker at a Democratic event on Saturday. Every candidate for governor is going to be there. Let me know what you want me to say. I'm going to be speaking for a half an hour, and I'm going to be streaming it on my TikTok live. So get me what you want to hear. I cannot guarantee that I am going to be able to get everything you guys suggest in there, but they're going to want to hear from the people of Wisconsin. And seeing as I do talk radio for a living and I'm good at interacting on the fly with all of you guys here, I want to incorporate you as well, because Attorney General Josh Kaul should be right in sync with what the California AG is doing, because granted, I've never used Amazon before, but I'm willing to bet 90% of the people listening to me right now have probably used Amazon to buy something. And if anything, I am underestimating on that number right now. This is the reality. It hasn't been borne out yet, so I have to say allegedly for now, but the emails are available. I was reading direct quotes to you from emails. There was no speculative information there. Jerry says, going back to the JetBlue conversation, I remember when airlines would offer a bereavement discount if you needed to go to a funeral on short notice. I had no idea that that was a thing, and it goes to show you how far we've fallen. And again, it makes you wonder. It makes you wonder what broke in people, because I refuse to believe that people are just simply more greedy now. At the end of the day, human beings are just animals, right? It was just, we just kind of trudge along here, applying meaning to whatever it is that we do. What changed that now, instead of offering a discount because of a funeral, companies like JetBlue take it as an opportunity to raise the rate by $230 and then delete the post where they essentially admit that they are using surveillance pricing to jack that price up? How does that exactly happen? I would love to figure out how we get there. DSL says, is there a way to stop corporate greed without tanking the stock market and crushing everyone's retirement? Wasn't that interesting? It's almost like they kind of make it a pact, a death pact, that if you try and take us down, we'll ruin retirement for everybody else. I don't have a simple answer for that, but if you want my honest opinion here, DSL, I would say we tax these sons of guns into oblivion and then apply that to retirement funds, amongst other things, of course. But we start to take the money back that we're clearly getting fleeced, because I'm not willing to live as a hostage, because we have created a system that has allowed a handful of wealthy people to exploit us. And if we catch them, they'll say, well, we will burn this Mother Hubbard down if you do not allow us to continue fleecing us. Just keep blaming Mexicans and Somalis. Just keep blaming the orange man and his tariffs. Stop acknowledging the obvious truth that we have been jacking up prices since COVID simply because we can. And we know that most of you as sheep will continue chasing your own tails. Not anymore on my watch. I know I've been one of the loudest voices combating corporate greed since September of 22 when you all met me. But now that it is becoming an unavoidable truth, the reality that all of us have to live in, it's time to get real. It is time to get real about the problems that we face. And it's not the wages that employees are getting paid. It's not undocumented immigrants. It's that 7 companies control everything, and they keep getting caught red-handed, exploiting a system that does not have a government willing to hold them accountable when they are obviously breaking the rules. Lori says, I think there might be a typo, but I'm just going to read it as typed. List, you think that airlines 35 years ago were more humanitarian than they currently are. I was sold one of those discount airline tickets for my mother's funeral. I was told that it was round trip and it was not. Well, there you go. Okay, good. So they always were selfish then, and it's just more flagrant now because we have access to the internet. And again, way less competition than we had 30, 40 years ago. But I appreciate the story there, Lori. It sounds about right. With that, we're going to put a pin in the conversation. Anybody else's thoughts? I'm going to check out the YouTube chat and scroll through the TikTok live here chat as well, because these things get bumping. It's hard for me to keep up with live and keep a train of thought. And then we'll keep the conversation rolling on the other side of the break. So stay right where you are. You're listening to Outside the Box with Ben Cominos here on WHBY. Newer texter Jim out in Appleton saying this has been going on since the oil embargo in the 70s. And I mean, I do regularly say it's all about it's since the Reagan era, right? From 1945 to 1983, high taxes on the wealthiest earners led us to an outcome that was more favorable. We were inventing Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, the interstate section, the minimum wage. Some of these things happened before 1945, but the principle still holds true. Um, and then after St. Reagan showed up and decided, hey, wouldn't it be better if 7 billionaires had all the money? The middle class has been slowly constricting for the last 30 years while political parties find reasons to distract you or give you boogeymen in order to chase your tails with, whether it's the black community or the gay community or the trans community or the immigrant community, as long as you don't focus on the major issue. And what's scary to me, to DSL's point, is it's becoming an unavoidable truth. Even the most unabashed haters out there, the people that just want to find any reason, you know why housing's so expensive? Mexicans are getting the houses. Like, even the most unabashed people are beginning to realize, you know what? I'm beginning to realize that there's very big issues with this country, and it doesn't have to do with the poorest Americans holding me back. It has to do with the wealthiest ones doing it. And I'm worried about what the end game is once those people realize that they're not going to be able to pull the hood over most of our eyes anymore. It's a thought I have quite a bit. This job is very existential. Because I do wonder, as DSL highlights, if you highlight things like what's wrong with this price collusion. And I have Tom on the TikTok chat. He said that the AI in on TikTok is describing this show is about corporate financing. No, it's about wealth inequality. It's about corporate greed. It's about a lawsuit that was brought against Amazon, coordinating with Walmart, Target, Home Depot, Global One, and so many other um companies, major companies that have huge market shares, making sure that their prices are as high as possible, knowing that we will blame each other and blame politicians instead of blaming the one very obvious truth. So, to Jim's point, the oil embargo absolutely contributed specifically to the conversation about air travel, but this has slowly been consolidating. It wasn't overnight. If we went in 1983 from what life was like in 83 to what life is like today in a year, there would have been riots every single day. There would have been absolutely no way we would have been okay with it. It required a 45-year slow restriction of the middle class as mom and pop shops continued closing down all around the nation, as what we identify as the middle class continued shrinking, as competition continued shrinking. Again, in 1993, there were over 50 defense contractors. There are now 6. Pick an industry, and I will show you an industry that has consolidated to just a small few companies that are using their collective market share to take advantage of the system. And I'll even use my biggest weakness. And trust me, I'm trying to work on it, but I do not know if I have the willpower to push back. Disney purchased Marvel in 2012, I want to say. From 2012 to 2016, roughly 30 movies plus countless TV shows, toys, video games, and other tie-in products were produced. We're talking about a $30 billion investment. That was what this company has made just off of the Marvel properties. That does not include theme parks. That doesn't include these live action remakes of the cartoons. $35 billion in profit last year total for Disney. They have laid off 1,000 people from their visual effects department and have said that they are switching to using AI for their movies going forward. The Avengers movie Doomsday coming out in December, a lot of their special effects are going to be created using AI. Amongst the 1,000 layoffs was Andy Park. If you are not a nerd like me and don't know who Andy Park is, type his name into Google, type Andy Park Marvel, and look at what he is responsible for creating between 2010 and today. The entire visual identity of the movie group that has consumed the box office for the last 16 years. One of the best people at what he does was laid off by a corporation making $35 billion a year in profit because they found a way to lay him off and turn that $37 billion or $35 billion into $37 billion by not having to pay a full-time special effects staff anymore and switching to a freelance approach that will not have to pay benefits and will not offer secure employment to any of the people that have taken the time to develop skills that nobody listening to me outside of maybe Justin, who works in graphic design, has the capacity to do. And we're supposed to pretend like that is normal. We're supposed to pretend like that is business as usual. Why did we just cut their taxes if that's the way they are going to behave? Why did we cut Amazon's taxes if their game plan is to manipulate the prices that we have to pay and use their market share to make sure that we have no way to push back? Why did we cut their taxes if they're going to turn around and say, we can't pay employees a living wage because we got to make a maximum profit? What is it exactly that we are supposed to accept coming from our businesses, and how do we circumvent them when there is no alternate opportunity to do so? I hope Andy Park gets picked up by Warner Brothers in DC, but that's like the only other company in Hollywood these days. So if he's not, it looks like he's SOL. This is what people are dealing with in this economy that need to be called out. All right. Brian in Appleton says, quick shout out to Ben. My youngest son and his wife are on their way to Greece. Thank you very much. They should catch up on Outside the Box. Download the WHBY app. Follow me on YouTube, TikTok, or Facebook. Show stream live there every day. And shout out to the people that have kind of become regulars here. Cynthia says Noam Chomsky warned about this in Manufacturing Consent, consolidation of the media, etc., but AI wasn't an issue. Oh, 100%. I have audio pulled because I've been getting dogpiled by a couple of Blue MAGA libs saying that I have no way of knowing if Kamala Harris were president, whether or not we'd be in war with Iran. So I took it upon myself to find evidence that that would be the case. And of course, the media isn't covering it in any way of like, hey, what do people do if they're anti-war? Where do people turn when they are anti-war? Which is just another conversation about what you're talking about there. And Ben's just talking about the product deteriorating. I mean, that's in the eye of the beholder. I realize wokeness killed America or whatever, but Ben, you're kind of playing into the cards of what these billionaires want you to do. They're blaming they better not put a lesbian in there. Like, I wish that MAGA could get as mad that Disney is firing incredibly talented people and using computers to do their work, as mad as they would be because in the Buzz Lightyear prequel cartoon, the kid who gets Buzz Lightyear had two moms. Like, I wish you guys could get just as mad about stuff that mattered, but I just don't hold my breath for that kind of stuff anymore. I see somebody asking me about voting systems. I can get into that. And I see Native Gamer asking me about shrinkflation. I haven't brought it up today, but it's something I talk about all the time. And again, people are able to get away with it. A lot of you guys are newer to this show. The reader, I'll tell you what. we'll go to break, and then we're going to continue this conversation about inflation, about corporate greed. We're going to pivot in the 10 o'clock hour to foreign policy, but I do want to put a bow on it because that's a fair assumption here. And I kind of want to lay out exactly why I'm so frustrated and why the fact that Jerome Powell raising our interest rates during the Biden years was not only not necessary, but it provided cover for the corporations that are fleecing us. And I can prove it to you, not with speculation, but with economic theory and people that I have spoken to with PhDs in economics backing up a lot of these claims. We'll wrap up the hour with that conversation on the other side of the break. I welcome everybody else as well. I apologize. I'm falling behind on the YouTube chat here. Way too much information to parse through for one man to do it the right way. I am doing my best to keep you all included. I promise. We'll be back in just a little bit. You're listening to Outside the Box with Ben Cominos here on WHBY. On WHBY. You know what's better than Googling a plumber and hoping for the best? Checking the reviews and seeing your neighbors already trust and love them. Roush Plumbing has the Google reviews to back it up. Fox Valley homeowners are raving about the fast, friendly, and reliable service. And here's something you don't see every day: a free text line to a real plumber. Got a question before you schedule? Text it. Sometimes that's all you'll need. And with spring rains coming, don't wait to make sure that your sump pump is ready. Call or text Tim Roush Plumbing, the plumbing and remodeling company the Fox Valley depends on. Find that free text line and more info at timroushplumbing.com. All right. Can I break down a complex economic issue in 5 minutes or less? You bet your asses I can. So, the conversation was brought about. I was asked about shrinkflation. And yes, that is absolutely an issue. I don't really buy bags of chips anymore, but there's people in my life, or when I go to parties, they'll let you know that the bags are becoming more and more air and less chips every single day. So, I say all of that to say, um, there are definitely elements of this economy that are bogging down the American population. What goes into inflation, what goes into corporate greed, and what goes into why we are paying so much no matter where we end up. I want to share with you guys a story, though. Back when this show started in 2022, I had a show for 4 months with a Democratic trifecta, House, Senate, and presidency. And come January of 23, I was the canary in the coal mine. I was the guy saying, if Democrats are planning on running on January 6th and Bidenomics is working, it is going to be a long 2024. And sure enough, that is kind of the way that things ultimately ended up playing out. In 2022, I wanted to highlight something because it had been common knowledge since the beginning of 22 that corporate greed was happening. At the beginning of 2022, Bernie Sanders proposed a piece of legislation called the End Corporate Greed Now Act, which highlighted 30 different companies, including Amazon, which has, if you didn't listen to the first 10 minutes of the show, it has all but been borne out that they have been colluding with other companies in order to artificially raise their prices. But the End Corporate Greed Now Act included 30 different major companies across several different verticals, retail, healthcare, oil and gas, you name it, they were listed there. The proposal called for a tax on the excess profits, meaning they took the profits between 2014 and 2019, took those profits and averaged them and compared them to the profits that were made in 2021, which were exponentially larger than what had been going on before, showing that while supply shocks absolutely did happen, there was absolute fleecing taking place as well, to the tune of record profits across multiple industries. He called for a tax of 95% on the excess profits. Tax stay the same on the normal profits, excess profits taxed at 95%. American population gets a rebate check. Didn't even make it to the floor with the Democratic House, Senate, and presidency because the duopoly hates you. Instead, what happened was Jerome Powell started raising the interest rate. Now, what the Fed does is they have something called a dual mandate. They want to make sure that inflation stays around 2% and that unemployment stays around 4%, so that us plebeians are all fighting for jobs at lower wages, artificially suppressing our wages. And if we get too fed up, well, there's about 13 million unemployed people that would be happy to take your job if you want to complain about the pay that you're getting, and you can go be one of the unemployed homeless people. That is the way that the system works. So we had evidence back in 2022 that this was not a matter of inflation. There was no need to increase the rates. And we did anyway, so that more mom and pops were closing. It was becoming more difficult to own a home. It was more difficult to borrow money against a credit card. And all of these, we were getting sandwiched in from that side of things, all based on the false pretense that we needed to use the Fed in order to rein in inflation, when in reality, inflation didn't need to be reined in. Remember the conversation about Joe Biden and America having the best inflation rate relative to all of the other countries that are out there. That was a true statement. The reason people were frustrated was not because of inflation. They were frustrated because of corporate greed, but neither party's allowed to say that because they're both bought and paid for by the same billionaires. So when you talk about shrinkflation, that is actually a more real problem than the concept of inflation, because while it was happening, it was not explaining the kind of profits that existed. And we are still dealing with a far too high interest rates coming from the Fed in the name of making sure prices don't raise. And I'm here questioning the entire logic. So there's your 5-minute explanation on what's going on here. I've had a call waiting. If you can call back during the break, I can talk to you off the air as well. We got to get out of here. We'll be back on the other side of the news. All right, and we're back outside the box. Ben Cominos, WHBY, Political Voices Network. Outside the Box is brought to you by Roush Plumbing and Remodeling, the plumbing and remodeling company the Fox Valley depends on. If you are just joining us, we revisited the conversation we were having about corporate greed, consolidation, from a different perspective, of course. We were talking about surveillance pricing yesterday. We are now talking about price collusion with Amazon, Walmart, Target, Home Depot, and a handful of other companies, essentially caught red-handed in plain text of engaging in an effort to try and coordinate their prices, which kind of evolved into a more high-level conversation about corporate greed in general. And I did want to say, regular listener of the show, Doug, who actually listens on the WHBY app out in Meadville, where I went to college, in Pennsylvania, that is, was talking to me a little bit off the air, saying that he believes corporate greed is driven by the consumer looking for cheaper prices. Now, he and I just don't see eye to eye on this. I think it's a chicken or the egg kind of thing. As a Pittsburgh guy, and I know the people of Appleton can relate to this one here, although I don't know that the Appleton paper mill plants closed and went overseas. Correct me if I'm wrong, people that are local. I'm going to tell the Pittsburgh story, and if you know the story about the paper mills, I welcome that kind of insight to this conversation because I think it's worth having. But in the 60s and 70s, the steel mill workers in Pittsburgh were unionized. They were making good money in the steel mills, working in a dangerous job, hard work, earn the money that they were making. And the best part is the owners of the steel mills were still turning massive profits until one day they decided, you know what? We could actually make a larger profit if we send our companies to right to work states, pay the employees less for doing the same work, and we could take home a larger chunk of the money. And that's exactly what they did. The steel mills closed down. Thankfully, my state pivoted to being a technology and medical center. But a lot of cities that ended up seeing that happen ended up kind of collapsing in on themselves. Shortly after moving those steel mills down south, those same steel mill owners realized, oh, son of a gun, that worked so well that we actually could send our steel mills to other countries overseas, pay those employees even less than we're paying the right to work employees, and make an even larger sum of the profits. And that's exactly what they did. And to me, I believe that this is it was a one hand washes the other kind of system here that led to it. By sending our jobs overseas and having migrant labor, oftentimes children, do this job for pennies on the dollar, they were able to artificially keep the cost of goods very low because you didn't have to pay a living wage to a worker. So we got used to cheap products, and hell, to a certain extent, any of the products that distract us and keep us off the picket lines, i.e. video games, i.e. TVs, and a handful of other products, have stayed relatively consistently priced, considering all of the other price increases that we have seen. New video games just made the jump from $60 to $70. I'm telling you right now, in 1992, a new video game was $60, and in 2022, a new video game is $60. Doesn't make any sense. I'm not complaining. It doesn't make any sense. So it's kind of a coincidence that it happens that way. But so I say all of that to say the idea that you are trying to put corporate greed on the consumer for expecting lower prices, I would argue what we are dealing with is 45 years of conditioning consumers to expect lower prices while not increasing their wages. And I think that's a very important part of the conversation. You don't notice that your wages aren't going up when you can still afford to go on a vacation once a year, when a new TV isn't out of reach, when eventually buying a home and starting a family is in your reach. You do not notice that your wages are not going up commensurate to corporate profits or the level of productivity that is taking place in a given industry. Now we are losing the pretense of offering Americans this cheap, affordable labor because you know what happened? The countries that we were taking advantage of, not all of them, but a lot of them, look at what the average wage in China is today relative to what it was in the 90s. America naively thought that these countries would be happy doing our slave labor in perpetuity, when in reality, they took the opportunity to do this. Their handful of major wealthy individuals and billionaires in a country like China earned a killing. And unlike America, they did this stupid thing where they took a lot of the billionaire money and reinvested it in the public. I am not saying that it is perfect over there. It is overly authoritarian. There are plenty of issues to be upset with within China. But over the last 35 years, the reason that country is growing is because we sent our jobs over there in the name of making extra profits. It was corporate greed before the obvious corporate greed. And now we don't have an exit strategy. And so, as I was highlighting off the air while I was chatting with Doug, AOC, and I had a listener here on the chat line. I apologize, I'm already forgetting the name now. John hit me up on the TikTok chat and essentially and corrected me on it. AOC opened a sweatshirt company called Tax the Rich, and she was selling hoodies at a much higher up mark price, $65, whatever the hell it was. I don't have the numbers in front of me. And people were saying, I'm trying to get a hoodie for $30. How are you going to call it Tax the Rich and charge this much? Well, the issue was she was paying Americans to do the work. And in America, in order to be able to afford this kind of stuff, you need to be able to make enough money. So she was paying her employees a living wage, and that impacted the price, which piggybacks off of DSL's more existential conversation. How do we unfurl this ball of string? I do not have the economic mind to break that down in a 2-hour talk show on the radio. But what I can highlight is the answer is not for Jerome Powell to continue increasing our interest rates in the name of tamping down inflation. Our interest rates could go up to 40%. It doesn't matter if people are just charging us more. It's not a matter of inflation. It's a matter of people just being able to get away with charging us an excess amount. Jim on the YouTube chat said, once upon a time, there was a guy on the radio. His name was Michael Savage. Mr. Savage was a contemporary of Rush Limbaugh. Just before he was pulled off the air, he made a great statement. Controlled capitalism is the best economic system in the world. Uncontrolled capitalism is the worst system possible. We are currently now in an uncontrolled system. Something that I say in my own personal life is capitalism is good, but it needs a socialist waistband. Otherwise, it consumes everything. It's like I stated yesterday. It's like I've stated 1,000 times on this show before. If Obamacare had gone into action while also allowing for a public option providing generic drugs at cost, private pharma companies would not be able to get away with gouging us, at least on generics, because there would always be a constant competition. You want the good stuff and you make a little bit more money, feel free to get gouged to your heart's content. But that would have allowed for the price to stay low as a result of the government operating as a competitor. But Republicans, along with a handful of rotating villain Democrats, operated to make sure that that was not the case, that it was not possible to put that there. And that is why we have to consistently increase the number of tax dollars going to Medicare and going to different Obamacare subsidies, because we didn't provide that socialist waistband to a capitalist system that is absolutely designed to consume whatever industry that it is trying to consume. This is why, as I keep highlighting, there are so many young people interested in socialism, full-blown socialism and full-blown communism instead of capitalism, because they have only been adults to see unchecked capitalism consume everything and not leave an outlet for them to be able to get a foothold in this life, as we watch entry-level jobs get eliminated. And as we watch the ones that still maintain, still not offer nearly enough in order to be able to get into a home, or barely even afford the average rent in a city. There comes a time when we have to acknowledge the obvious shortcomings of a system and address them, and leaving them unchecked. You're saying, what are you, Russian? You communist China? Those don't carry the same kind of insults, because if you look at the way people in China are living today, the average middle-class citizen, I think the average American middle-class citizen would look at that and be like, oh, son of a gun. Am I? Am I communist China? Because they don't know the other side of things here. It's a strange thought to have all the time. I genuinely feel like people my age were the last people to take advantage of a version of America that I think a lot of you in your late 40s, 50s, and 60s all kind of think still exists because you have that foothold. Like, as I oftentimes highlight, I am the embodiment of what I say is very difficult to do today. And I openly acknowledge that I don't know that I would be able to do it if I had been born 10 years later. If I lived the exact same life I lived just 10 years later, I'm not sure that I would be in the position that I am in today because it just is not the same. I am so thankful that I work a gig that I like so much that has offered me the capacity to network and to branch out, that I feel pretty safe in my situation right now. But I also acknowledge the survivor's guilt that comes with that, because there are so many people in my life that I think are harder workers than me, that are smarter than me, that are more talented than me, that are just struggling to get by. And not through any fault of their own. They work, they have a family, it's just the basic cost of living. And how it essentially precludes you from doing certain jobs anymore that it didn't used to do back in the day. It really is that simple. Joe says, wondering if you've seen the Tom Tiffany commercial making himself out as just a wholesome regular guy. I have. In the commercial, he's having a beer with his grandmother. He says he will cut your taxes, nothing about health insurance, Social Security, or the fact that young people being able to buy a house is slim, social programs, minimum wage, or college prices. It's sickening to watch. It's an interesting strategy, and I didn't intend to get into that today. But all that being said, I think your assessment on it is fair. What you're seeing there, Joe, I'm going to get sidetracked. I already can feel it coming because I have thoughts about this. Tom Tiffany's entire campaign has to be about separating himself from Donald Trump, because Donald Trump hasn't done a single good thing during his presidency outside of, Mexicans are more scared to do things. But I'll be real, my life hasn't changed one red cent, other than my apartment complex is less fun because there was a large migrant population there that all moved away as soon as he became the president. But so, to your point, there's a reason why he's not talking about any of those things. I don't think he has a particularly strong case to make. As I mentioned, I'm going to be speaking to the Democratic gubernatorial candidates on Saturday, and I'm essentially going to have that conversation, letting them know he doesn't have a case, but it's their job to make a case for why they should be voted for, because highlighting that Donald Trump sucks is just not an acceptable platform to be running on in 2026, at least in my opinion. It most certainly isn't going to win over new voters. And as you've seen, there are large percentages of MAGA that think Donald Trump is doing awesome things because they're not capable of thinking for themselves. It's a remarkable reality that a lot of them that a lot of those guys face. But to your point, he is trying to distance himself from the Trump agenda and trying to present himself as not MAGA, not like those loony leftists. I'm just a regular guy. That's going to be his policy. And if I'm running for governor, I'm saying, why haven't you done anything about the tariffs strangling Wisconsin farmers? Why haven't you done anything about the illegal war in Iran that 70% of Americans think should not be happening and do not believe has been adequately described to them? Explain to me why you've been silent on those things and expect us to trust you to run Wisconsin. That would be my platform, and I think it would be pretty hard to beat. And then I obviously would just talk about what we talk about every single day on this show and why it's important to highlight those kind of things. All right. And so with that, I do have conversations here. The text line is bumping today, though. I kind of feel like my radio show instincts are telling me just to stick with what's working here. So I will say, DSL shared a conversation. If you didn't hear the end of the 9 o'clock hour, we were talking about the Fed and his capacity and his strangling of small mom and pops, and DSL came in with his specialty, acknowledging how Democrats suck while completely ignoring the shortcomings of the Republican Party. We call it the DSL specialty. He says, and never forget, in liberal-run cities, during the self-imposed lockdowns during COVID, mom and pop stores had to be closed, but big box stock exchange stores could pack in as many people as could fit. That's another reason I laugh at the No Kings protest. The people that went along with actual tyranny are now pretending they're against fake tyranny, and many of them still wear masks. So obviously he's still been out of shape about the COVID pandemic, which for those of you that don't know my thoughts on it, with the benefit of hindsight, I think there was an overreach by government agencies. And living in Pennsylvania when that happened, what he's describing did happen. Our governor at the time was Tom Wolf, and he closed essentially all mom and pop shops, but the buddies that he went to college with were allowed to keep their stores open. Very famously, a window and door store was able to stay open and capitalize on all the money while other ones were going out of business. Not everything he said there is inaccurate. It's just ignoring the objective, complete lack of interest in the MAGA movement, trying to address those shortcomings at all, and only more mom and pop shops are closing with Trump's tariffs, with the gas prices going up as a result of his war of choice in Iran. It's the uniparty, but unfortunately, it seems like we can only dunk on liberals here sometimes. But that absolutely is part of the problem as well. The only thing is, if another disease that we are unable to define were to break out tomorrow, I'm telling you right now, I will use my platform to call for lockdowns until we know what's actually going on. Because I'm not going to risk Planet of the Apes happening because somebody wants to go and get a haircut or go to their local bar. It turns out that if you weren't of a certain age and didn't have certain health ailments, COVID wasn't going to, in all likelihood, COVID was not going to take you out. But at the time, we didn't know that. And so if a new disease comes out, maybe it's just like COVID. Maybe it's more innocuous than COVID. Maybe it makes it so all humans can't talk and all monkeys get really, really smart. And in case it's that latter thing, I think we should pump the brakes and wait. And I don't think that that should be identified as tyranny. That is the intelligent, scientific decision to do, because I'm not ready to die yet. We got Rick in Macville. The paper industry here in the valley was pretty safe from moving so far away from the river for power and the trees for pulp. The mills that were hurt was by technology, specifically papers like copy paper. Yeah, that was kind of my attitude as well. I feel like the paper mills ended up going away because of the shift to digital. I used to sell copiers and printers, so I kind of know a little bit about that industry, and that's kind of why I assumed that they ended up in that boat. Whereas the steel mill, we still use steel today. The reason the steel mills aren't still open in Pittsburgh, or mostly in America in general, was more so as a result of corporate greed rather than it was anything else. I figured as much, but I appreciate that. We got one here. Doug out in Meadville coming in. My daughter, 25 years old, bought a house in Oshkosh. Her rent was $1,225. Her payment is now $1,550 with the help of a Wisconsin down payment assistance. In 30 years, she'll own a home and be way ahead because rent will continue to rise 100%. And I'm very thankful that there was a government agency developed to help her be able to afford that in a more meaningful way. We should be doing more to strengthen that, because I'm here to tell you right now, I own a home in the city of Pittsburgh. No slight on Oshkosh, but average cost of homes, it's a duplex. It's not even a home, it's a duplex. In Pittsburgh, per capita is more expensive than what's going on in Oshkosh, and my payment is significantly lower than what you are describing right now. I'd be able to afford it, but I'm just saying it's not a natural increase in growth. We will just say that much. I'm not going into specifics. Justin says, regarding DSL's comments, one man's tyranny is another man's inconvenience. I was partial on lockdowns, but that ain't tyranny. Citizens shot dead by federal agents, First Amendment tax surveillance, and anti-Second Amendment measures are tyranny. I would absolutely agree with you on that. The masked Virgin Army, known as ICE, is infinitely more tyrannical than anything that took place during COVID, and I think that's a pretty safe thing to say there. Brian says maybe we needed 1 million more deaths. I'm right there with you. Ernie says, I've heard that eventually we'll be begging for communism. Well, what's interesting about that, Ernie, is the Nazi salute and jag that runs Twitter is actually already advocating for communism. He's saying that AI is becoming so prevalent that he's calling it high universal basic income. And for the record, I am a fan of UBI, but the second that Elon Musk recommends everything, my sensors go off and I'm like, okay, he means to do this in a worse, shady way that I'm absolutely going to hate. But what he's essentially advocating for is communism. Everybody gets a flat wage because no one's going to have to work anymore. and we run with that. I'm more in favor of a couple extra $100 pumped into your pockets every single month, brought about by an actual tax on the wealthiest Americans and corporations that reflects what life used to be like between the 40s and the 80s. But that's just me, of course. Maybe we're splitting hairs, but I don't know if we'll ever be begging for communism, because any ism, I'm so far off the rails. Show me any ism, communism, socialism, or capitalism. Show me any country that does those. And if you have corrupt leadership, I will show you a country where resources and wealth are consolidated at the top and the rest of us are fighting for the scraps. And that is what we are dealing with right now. Friendly reminder, the wealth inequality in America, not in communist China, not in socialist Venezuela. The wealth inequality in America is more dramatic than it was in 1790s France. And if you don't know how the ending to the 1790s wealth inequality in France ended, I suggest you go look it up, because TikTok will kick me off of the app if I say what people ended up doing. But I'm just saying that was how that ended, and we are currently sitting in a worse situation today, and that is worth discussing in a meaningful way. With that, we're gonna squeeze a break in here, and then we'll get into what the show is actually going to be about. There's so many sources of information doing this program. I'm gonna have to do a better job at sticking to the points, but also including you guys. I don't know what that looks like yet, but we'll figure it out. I think the show's still good. It's a growing process here. I love all this interaction, though. It's very fun, and I appreciate that. With that, we're gonna go to break. We'll jump into um, let's keep the conversation on taxes, and we'll tie that in with food party conversations, and hopefully, if time, a conversation about literacy rates in America. What does it mean to be able to read at a sixth grade level, and how many Americans between age 16 and 75 are incapable of doing that? Shocking data to talk about with you guys on the other side of the break. You're listening to Outside the Box here on WHBY. All right, we're back outside the box. Ben Cominos, WHBY. Was chatting a little bit with the TikTok live chat. A native gamer washes windows while he's listening to the show, and I was asking him if he's like in the scaffolding when he's like 40 stories up, because those people should get paid $300,000 a year. Because I'm telling you right now, I would never do it. The windows would just be eternally dirty. Like there's no way to do it. He's more residential right now, so that much I could probably handle. It would still be streaky. I'm not saying the job would be done well, but the job would be done. Which is all you can really ask for in America in 2026, that is. But nevertheless, I appreciate you carving out the time, as I do for all you guys listening to this program here. If you haven't seen the video that I put up on my socials yet, it focuses on the concept of giver and taker states. And I think that fits in nicely with the conversation that we have been having here today surrounding, tax rates, socialism, communism, corporate greed, things of that nature. It highlights the states that are identified as what are colloquially called taker states versus giver states. Now, I want to get this out in the forefront here. It's a recurring series that I'm going to start called Shut Up and Take My Money, meaning stop talking about socialism and welfare programs and tax handouts as long as you are a member of the working class and you are contributing to society, whether it be through work or just through existing in your community. I am okay with tax subsidy going to you. I am not okay with tax subsidy going to you if you already have 12 figures in your bank account. There's got to be some semblance of agreement there on that front. If you haven't seen the video, there are 22 states that are identified as taker states, meaning they contribute less to the federal income tax budget than they receive. For the record, both Wisconsin and Pennsylvania, my two homes, are part of the giver states. They generate more tax revenue than they take in for welfare programs, Medicaid, SNAP, you name it. That being said, 5 of the 22 states are Democratic states, and it's none of the ones that you think it is. It's not California, it's not New York, because the stock market and Silicon Valley keep those states out of the taker realm. It's New Mexico, Oregon, Michigan, Vermont, and Maine. The rest of the states on the list are red states, and yet those are the same states that are complaining about welfare programs, about illegals getting your welfare, about all of these different things that aren't real or are real, but not to the extent that a lot of people in politics would have you believe. And they are willing to echo those lies despite very obviously being the welfare states. Again, not mocking, not saying we should stop. If anything, I'm in favor of increasing the aid going to these places, as long as it is also reflected in other states as well. And it goes to show you that there is a fundamental lack of understanding of how taxation works and who actually is on welfare. Because I promise you, if you ask anybody in those states, well, why do you deserve this welfare? Well, I earned it. I paid for this. I deserve what's happening here. It's the other people that are taking advantage of the system. And I'm here to tell you that I think that goes hand in hand with literacy rates. 54% of American adults, that's age 16 to 74, roughly 130 million Americans read below a 6th grade level. It's a conversation that is talked about, but probably not nearly enough. Now, there is some overlap between those states as well as a handful of other. California is one of the most egregious examples of that, but New Mexico, Texas, Alabama, Florida, Georgia, Louisiana, Nevada, handful of other states. These are all the highest ranking among them. Again, Wisconsin and PA, while not ideal, we're still elevated around the 12%, more than 1 in 10 people not able to read at a sixth grade level. That's nothing compared to the closer to 1 in 3 people in some of the states that we're talking about there. To me, that lends itself to not understanding tax policy, but that just barely scratches the surface. If I asked you guys, what does it mean to not be able to read at a sixth grade level, how would you identify that? What would you think that means? Picture how you read in sixth grade. Now, again, I grew up in a house that very much prioritized reading at a very young age. But I would argue my reading comprehension has only grown exponentially since then. But in sixth grade, I think I was able to do a lot of the basics. Well, there's an actual definition of what reading at a sixth grade level actually looks like. And I would like to highlight for you what this means 130 million Americans are not able to do. It means they can't work out the correct dose of a children's medicine label. It means they can't read their own pay slips. It means they can't follow instructions on a consent form before surgery. It means they can't locate basic information in a short newspaper article. The average sixth grader in 1850 was expected to have read the Bible and be able to understand Shakespeare. The fact that we have progressed as a nation, because looking backwards at history, it always feels like it was an inevitable outcome because you already know how everything played out, but it wasn't inevitable. Things had to work a certain way. This is a systemic issue. I am not blaming public schools. I am not blaming parents that are forced to take on more work responsibility in order to afford the basic necessities in order to raise a child. I am not blaming the children themselves. I am not blaming the COVID lockdowns that probably set a good handful of our youngest people back in ways that we probably won't know until much further in the future. This is a problem being ignored. And moreover, I think it's why it feels like I'm metaphorically banging my head against the wall every single day, trying to highlight points about economics, about historical legislation, about the way that things used to work, in a way to highlight the shortcomings in America, in a way that it feels like a never ending Groundhog's Day that's kind of difficult to avoid. That chart was so eye-opening for me because it says to me just how much of an uphill battle we are facing. Because I'll be frank with you guys, it's going to take a long bleeping time to undo this kind of damage. It's not something that 1 or 2 public school systems can fix. It's not something that a piece of legislation can fix. I've shared my own personal story. My mom was one of the brightest women I've ever met in my life. Went to Carnegie Mellon University for college, probably could have done whatever she wanted in life. When I was born, she decided to quit her career and raise me and eventually my younger brother until my younger brother was 12 and then returned to work. While she was doing that, she was making sure that I knew how to read before I went to kindergarten, helping me with my multiplication tables, doing things to get me academically engaged before schooling even started. By the time I got to school, it was just more of an element of reinforcement rather than trying to learn the basic skills that you need to exist in life. I am not saying this to shame parents that are not doing that with their kids. I understand that it's a different life. And by the way, we struggled as a result of that decision. Just nothing comparable to how families with 2 incomes struggle today. When you consider these facts surrounding a capacity to read, it highlights what we are up against politically and why it seems like something, aren't they coming to trans your kids, is such an effective strategy politically in 2026. And it's because so many people struggle with the high level elements of politics and of life in general because of a lack of interest in developing reading skills. And so, these two things tie together, and I think it's why a lot of the quote unquote taker states refuse to acknowledge that they are taker states while advocating to remove the tax dollars necessary to educate them to be better prepared for the future. It's an interesting conversation to say the least. And I just wanted to bring it to you guys because that made my jaw hit the floor. You hear people say, oh, they can't read at a sixth grade level, but you never really internalize what that means. Not being able to read your pay stub probably would determine why it is that people really don't understand why taxes do or don't benefit them, why it's so easy to manipulate the majority of masses. Again, 130 million people. Not all of those people can vote, but only 2 years of that scale is uneligible to vote. 18 to 74 is going to the polling place, and they barely can sound out the names that they are looking at there. I think that probably should be a major concern, along with Amazon's efforts to fleece us more. Why do you think it is price consolidation and corporate greed aren't story number one? Well, because in a country where so many people are reading at below a sixth grade level, stories about porn stars sleeping with presidents and a Mexican scourge taking advantage of a country are much easier to understand than antitrust law that hasn't been enforced for the last 45 years. Wild information as far as I am concerned. And I'm interested what your thoughts are on it as well. 920-281-1150, 920-281-1150. I've got one more segment. I can't go a full 2 hours without talking about the situation in Iran. I'm just physically incapable of doing it, I'm pretty sure. But not from the perspective you guys think I'm going to talk about it. I received a fairly inflammatory email yesterday asking why and I'm not going to say what he called me, but why I think that I can see the future about what would have happened with the Democratic establishment in office right now regarding a war in Iran. And I think it's an important conversation to be had because it shows that if you truly are anti-war, I identify as an anti-war leftist. There's plenty of anti-war right-wingers out there as well. You truly do not have a party to identify with. And I'm going to show you exactly why. This jerk understands exactly why we are embroiled in this and why it was an inevitable outcome, regardless of who was president. The only thing that would change is who would be saying this is a dumb idea and who thinks it's the smartest idea they've ever seen. And we'll jump into that on the other side of the break. You're listening to Outside the Box with Ben Cominos here on WHBY. All right, we're back outside the box. Ben Cominos, WHBY, Political Voices Network, about to wrap up the program here. By the way, I put it up on my YouTube page here. Jar Armani mentioned while I was talking about reading levels in people not being able to read at a 6th grade level. She says, RE 6th grade reading level. I know people who work in healthcare and they specifically keep consumer messages at a 6th grade level for the reasons that I am talking about. So I feel like that sums it up right there. Why it is that we're in the position that we are in. But I have 5 minutes before I have to call it a show, and I want to drive this point home because one guy was a jerk in my emails, and I take things personally, and I make it my mission to make sure that I can prove them wrong before my show is over. I have been stating fairly often that I believe in a Kamala Harris presidency, we would still be engaged in a war with Iran. The only thing that would change is because you have to speak to MAGA voters and Republican voters, you talk about the threat of Muslims and nukes. Whereas if it's liberal voters, you have to talk to them about we have to defend their democracy. And have you seen what they do to women in Iran? And fundamentally, Secretary of State Cheney would have been on board with a war in Iran, so on and so forth. And people say, oh, this guy thinks he can see the future, which if you're new here, yes, I can. But more importantly, why does he think he's so smart to be able to say what he thinks will happen? There's no way to know. Well, thankfully, Amos Hochstein, the senior most advisor in Joe Biden's energy department, was speaking as recently as this Sunday about his thoughts on Donald Trump's actions in Iran. And you'll never guess what he said. Actually, yes, you will.
In July 2024, Secretary Blinken claimed Iran was 1 or 2 weeks away from having enough fissile material breakout capacity to eventually make a weapon if Iran had decided to do so. There were indirect negotiations that the Biden administration did, but it went nowhere. So when President Trump argues that he did when no other president would, is it just simply that the bill was coming due and it fell on his watch?
I do think there's a certain element to that. And that's why I was supportive of President Trump joining in June to take the strikes that we had thought internally in the Biden administration we may have to take if there was a second term. We thought that the spring, summer of 2025 was probably, we may have to be there in the same place.
And wow.
We did war games. We did some practice runs on what it would look like to look into it. And because that may have had to happen under our watch as well. But he said we obliterated their nuclear program. It's not about what he did in June. This war we were in now did not attack the nuclear facilities again. Mm-hmm. This was not about the nuclear. So the question now becomes, can you do a deal with the Iranians? And the maximalist positions that both sides have are right now very far apart, despite all the rhetoric that we're almost there or we are there, but if we're not there, we'll bomb the hell out of them.
So it looks to me like we were inevitably going to end up there no matter what. And the only thing we're haggling about is the measures in which Donald Trump is using. He blew up a school. I'm not ignoring that reality whatsoever. There's also rumors that they were using AI to enact the strikes. Are you going to try and convince me that a Kamala Harris presidency wouldn't be using AI to cut corners? Because I don't think you were paying attention to the same vice presidential candidate that I was. So waka waka to the person in my emails who decided to get a little ignorant. I don't just say things to say them. I say them because I truly mean them. And it just so happens that it was pretty easy to find some evidence to back up the claim that I was trying to make there. And Tim, of course, echoing the sentiment as well. If she had won and still have had a GOP House and Senate, who would have most likely supported the war? Absolutely right. But of course, MAGA voters would have told you, why can't liberals keep their business in America? And it would have been liberals telling you about the importance of this war and the importance of not addressing corporate greed. Around and around we go. Call me names all you want, but I'm very rarely ever proven wrong. Important to remember that on a Tuesday morning. With that, we're calling it a show. Thank you for listening. Download the WHBY app. All you got to do is search WHBY in Google Play or in the App Store. It's free and easy to use. Thank you all the people on TikTok, YouTube, and Facebook Live. I appreciate you guys joining each and every day here as we continue trying to evolve what this show is going to be. Consider subscribing to any and all of those. I'm at Ben Cominos on YouTube. Go find me. It's a fun place to be. Plenty more coming up with Haley up next, and I'll be up tomorrow with the professors.